Hello everyone, welcome back to English 1102, Composition 2. It's so good to see all of your faces again. This time I wanted to thank Joy for creating this beautiful banner for us. I love to have it's really nice to kind of land on this page and just be reminded by all the sort of voices and experiences and insight you've shared with me the past couple of weeks already. I had such a great time reading through your community needs reflections, and I really think that this is an excellent way to start our research process by beginning with what interests us, our life experience, that sort of personal research in a sort of cultural community. What do we notice? And all of that insight builds into something that you found out last week can be actually tamed into some kind of a research question, set of research questions that we'll continue to think about, narrow, and sharpen. Always thinking about our research question as in flux depending upon what we're researching, and easily malleable and fluid, right? So our research question is something that we were thinking about last week and something that we'll continue to think about as we enter week 4, actually. Thanks so much for listening. Last week, our model reading was by Adam Rayner, Confessions of a Tableside Flambeur, and what he was doing is something similar to what you're doing, thinking about subject, audience, writer, but particularly the exigence, why we're writing about the subject we're writing about. So in these reflections, in these community needs papers, a lot of you, what I've done is been really excited about where you've started and trying to harness and give you direction for shaping one of those kernels that seems so important that maybe was buried in the larger draft. And so for a lot of you, I pointed out something that you were saying, but maybe not as overtly. And so you'll see here in this piece by Rayner that it was a piece about foodies. It was a piece about working in restaurants, but more than a sort of critique about those who pay a lot of money for their food, it was a consideration of his place as a server in one of these restaurants and the kind of treatment he received. And so he kind of uncovered that after a few paragraphs. That's sort of the crux of this writing. He said, I used to resent diners shooting video of me tossing crab Louis salads, filleting holdover soles, or flipping wild mushroom omelets cooked in black truffle butter. I'd often wonder how those same people would feel if a client randomly shoved a phone in their face to film them going about their business at the office, like reviewing a tax document or drafting a legal brief. Over time, I learned to accept that exhibitionism comes with the territory. Today's diners seek out restaurants for entertainment. The food is often secondary, and the restaurant owners seem more than happy to oblige. Whether we like it or not, the staff are considered part of the show. And so this is kind of the heart of the article and where we start to see a research question. Had Rayner maybe wanted to pursue this topic further, or whether or not he does pursue this further. We have a question here about the treatment of staff at restaurants and the place of social media, the place of personal footage and video shooting as part of a server's experience, whether or not they like that. And so the ethics of being photographed, the ethics of being filmed is kind of interesting. It's a question that he raises in that article. Alongside that particular article, we were thinking about the different aspects of what makes that writing persuasive. And these are things that we're going to be thinking about in our own writing too. What is our subject? Who is our audience? And how do we make our point persuasive and convincing? For us, a lot of it's going to be making sure that we're careful about the kinds of evidence, the kinds of dialogue, the kinds of characterization, the kinds of reflections that we're making in these early pieces. As we move into week 4, we're going to be starting to think a little bit about how our personal experiences are also something that can be translatable to a larger audience, something that others are interested in and could learn from. Where does research exist on these particular questions? Who's saying what? And so we're going to be assessing the feasibility of the research inquiry, building a body of research in the various stages of our research process, and here's a research process here, evaluating credibility of a variety of sources, and analyzing arguments, as we've been doing in the sources we've been reading. So we're going to be starting to develop a research plan and doing some background research and finding sources this week. We're also going to be doing some evaluation of sources, and I think this is going to be so exciting. This week looks like there's a lot of work included, so I want you to just take a deep breath and know that what I include in this week is really going to kind of carry us through weeks 4 and 5. So it looks like a lot of information, but I'm just trying to give you as much as I can so that you can kind of anticipate and plan for the basically next 2 weeks. So this week, the major tasks are to return to our community needs reflection draft and read through my feedback and work as best you can in terms of revising and rethinking through that particular draft. I also have you starting to think about collecting data and annotating sources. Our larger project is going to be called Data Collection and an Annotated Bibliography, which I'll explain in a minute. But I only want you to annotate or research and read one source. The project will altogether include 5 sources, but that won't be due until right before Thanksgiving. So you're going to have about 2.5 weeks to be researching. I do want to just make sure that as you're researching, you're completing the correct steps. So I'm going to have you, this will be considered your draft by sending me one annotation. And again, I'll give you information on how to create that annotation and show me that you're beginning to do some research. The major task this week, however, is to really sharpen our online verification skills, to really home in on what sources are out there, who's saying them, and is that information credible? As we continue to think about our research topics, we're going to need to be reading a lot and thinking about our questions. And we're not all going to be having the same topics, obviously. And so what's really important is that we think carefully about who's saying what about our topics and where we're finding that information. I have some really great research and writing by an author named Mike Caulfield, who teaches out of University of Washington. And these excerpts here are very short chapters that I've selected from his free online textbook about information literacy. How do we double check that this website is publishing something accurately? How do we find a source that was the original publication of the information we're looking for? How do we track a source of viral content? How can we filter sources online by time and place to find an original news source, not necessarily one that's been repeated as a secondary source? And how can we use Google Scholar to check author expertise? So there's a couple chapters here I'd like you to look through and take special care as you're reading through, taking notes, whether they're handwritten or maybe you're typing them online, making sure that you kind of get a set of skills that will equip you for thinking carefully about what you find in just a typical search when you're looking online for information about your sources. Next week, we're going to be looking into databases, academic, scholarly publications. This week, we're thinking more about the things you might find in popular news sources. And so these online verification skills are something that's going to be really important as part of English Composition 2, and something I'd like you to take careful time to examine. I have below an online verification skills worksheet that's due by Wednesday. And so in addition to reading these short excerpts and taking notes on them, I also have 4 short videos that altogether are less than 10 minutes to watch total. And so what I'd like you to do is, as you're reading, again, take notes for those videos, take notes for these chapters. But before you do that, what you might want to do is skim through. I have a quiz for you to take just to confirm that you've read, just to show that you have competence in the readings and competence in watching those videos, to kind of skim through and see the questions that I'm asking you that you become familiar with. What was the Stanford experiment? What group of people passed the Stanford experiment? Explain how fact checkers learn about the credibility of a source. What's something called the Wikipedia trick? What's an original reporting source? So kind of familiarize yourself with the questions. This is just a strategy before sort of reading through and watching those short videos. The most important part of this quiz is that you can demonstrate that you're going to find a source about your topic. Include your current research question, followed by a brief paragraph that narrates the steps you performed in an internet search concerning this research question. What initial source did you start with? So give me a link. What kind of source, popular source, did you find about this topic, if any? Hopefully you can land on something closely related to your research question. Then I want you to take some careful steps in terms of assessing that source. Is it reputable? Again, this all goes back to thinking about the rhetorical situation. How persuasive is our source? Where is it coming from? is this the original source, or is it reporting on a source that was already published before it and just sort of summarizing it? We want to always get back to the original source. And these are some steps that we can take to find those original sources. Again, please watch carefully these 4 videos and then reading really carefully through these very short chapters. They're each like 2 or 3 paragraphs long. Basic techniques, domain searches, and he does such a nice job of giving us screenshots about how to think about different pages. Is this a reputable newspaper? Kind of leading us through some steps that we should emulate as we're doing our own research. This is all, of course, in preparation for thinking about the kinds of sources we're collecting. We want to make sure that we're getting the best sources for our research topic, that they're accurate and that they're fact-checked. And so what we're going to be doing is, as we're thinking about collecting our sources, reading through sources and collecting these different data, we're also going to be compiling our sources that we do find, the best ones, into an annotated bib, which is really just a list of citations to articles, documents, books that are cited, and then just include a descriptive or evaluative paragraph. So it's not just, here's a source that's really good. It's, this is a particular source that I found, and this is why it's related to my research question, and this is what it says in summary, for example. And so we see these kinds of annotations everywhere. There's an annotated bib that includes information about how countries and local districts around the world are adapting social emotional learning and soft skills to emergency remote learning, for example. Or here's an annotated bib on equity and inclusion. And what they do is they provide readers a list of sources that someone's already gone through and given you a brief summary of. So say you wanted to learn a little bit about equity and inclusion. Here's a nice list of what someone's put together, very short annotation, just a brief sentence. Ours will be longer. Provides the source that the researcher found and a brief summary of what you could find in these sources. It really helps someone who wants to learn about a topic find out more and give them a set of sources that they've already researched and sort of compiled as the best ones attending to that particular topic. As part of your online verification skills quiz, you're going to be coming up with one source. You've already done this earlier in earlier weeks, but finding an additional source, or using that same source from a couple weeks ago, I'd like you to find the best source that reflects your research question. And when you do that, what I'm going to have you do is attend to a series of steps that not only describes what that source is by giving us the author, the date, and where it's published, but I also want you to do a little bit more of an in-depth sort of analysis of what is that particular source doing, what's it saying, and how is it related to your research question. So over the next few weeks, we're going to be compiling sources. I think this is going to be so fun because you'll be able to learn about your topic and collect the best sources related to that particular question that you're posing. And so for just this week, what we're going to do is describe one source, just collecting one source. And again, this source could be something you collected in earlier research. It can be a source that you mentioned in your online verification skills quiz. That's fine. We don't need to do extra work for that. But what I'd like you to do is make sure that you attend to the best sources. Is that source relevant and specific to your topic? Is it from a credible resource? Is it a current publication? And is it written by someone notable or reliable in that field? So as far as the actual annotation is concerned, what I want you to do is start with a citation, and I have, I'll give you a link for the citing in just a moment. A brief 2 to 3 sentence intro to the source that actually explains, like, can you explain to me how it's relevant to your research question? And then a longer couple sentences that evaluate and use analysis to explain how the source is convincing. So really taking the source, knowing the source, and thinking about some of the questions that one might think about when analyzing a source. What key terms or ideas or patterns do you see in the writing? What sources or other works does this text cite? These are all questions to get you thinking, but not necessarily things you have to answer line by line. Just maybe one of these questions to get you going on in terms of evaluation and analysis. I also want you to add a couple questions that source generated for you, and then 5 to 10 significant direct quotations from that source. And this is all in an effort so that when we get to our final project, it's a really easy move from researching to writing about that topic. I'll be helping you cite your sources, but in addition to trying to cite them on your own, I have a link here about how to cite like a website that you're finding. It'll take you to the COD page we're looking mostly at electronic sources. And if you scan down, you'll see that you can magazine articles, newspaper articles, websites here, websites on news websites, web page on a website, all different kinds of ways to cite online resources. You can look through here, but I'll also help guide you. Here's some sample annotations that include 5 altogether, but you're just doing 1 this week, and so you can see how that works out with these student examples. Please upload your draft of your one source to this Project 2 draft here, and that way you'll be able to see others because this is a journal rather than an assignment.